Generational trauma. She has a QR code there for anyone who's interested. That will take you to a survey, and she requests that if you're interested, that you scan that, and then you can provide feedback to her brief. All right, I'm going to introduce now Ms. Kristen Groh, and she's going to provide us an update on the Korean War Identification Project. Come on up, Kristen. Yeah. Here we go. All right.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kristen Groh, and I am the Korean War Identification Project Lead. It is an honor to be here to speak to you today about the continued efforts that we are doing in our laboratory to continue to identify our U.S. service members. First, I want to say it has been an honor to get to know several of you over the past 2 days. Thank you for sharing your memories, photos, stories, and even handwritten letters with me. It has been an honor to read through those and get to know you and your service members' stories a little bit better. Before I get started on giving you an update on the numbers and the science that we use in the lab, I want to provide you with a video that introduces the Korean War Identification Project. So my team, a little bit about the daily operations that we do and some perspectives from those analysts on my team. Well, it appears that the video is not on the slide, which is okay. I'm not sure what happened there, but that's okay. We'll just jump right into the update and providing you some numbers and information about the science. So the Korean War Project oversees the identification process for all Korean War cases. Our team is made up of 11 full-time analysts, and we represent the largest team in the DPAA laboratory. There are currently over 7,400 U.S. service members still missing from the Korean War, and our project encompasses cases from both North and South Korea, involving remains received from various sources, including the unknowns buried in the Punch Bowl Cemetery in Hawaii, turned over to us by North Korea, recovered during joint field operations, and those that have been recovered by MACRI, our partner organization in South Korea. The DPAA has accounted for 694 Korean War service members to date, and our dedicated team of analysts, ample laboratory space, the development of new analytical methods like isotope sampling, and the Armed Forces DNA laboratories, innovation in DNA testing techniques, and pursuit of family reference samples for the missing have all contributed to these results. Our project's main area of focus are the analysis of the Punch Bowl unknowns and the remains that we receive from the K-55 turnover, K-208, and the joint recovery operations, and working with our counterparts, MACRI, to conduct joint recoveries and repatriation of remains. The remains buried as unknowns at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific, also known as Punch Bowl, in Honolulu, are those that could not be successfully identified in the 1950s by the laboratory in Kokura, Japan. 210 of these unknowns were approved for disinterment on a case-by-case basis, beginning in 1999. And in 2018, DPAA received approval to disinter the remaining 652 Korean War unknowns that were buried in the Punch Bowl Cemetery at the time. These unknowns are being disinterred according to a seven-phase plan, which you are all aware of, also known as the Korean War Disinterment Project. The unknowns in each phase are grouped by historical provenience, and each phase includes cases from both North and South Korea. The unknowns disinterred through the Korean War Disinterment Project all fall under the Korean War Identification Project in the laboratory. The 73 unknowns in Phase 1 were disinterred between October 2018 and March of 2019. Phase 2 consisted of 117 unknowns disinterred between June 2019 and February of 2020. The 101 unknowns in Phase 3 were disinterred between December of 2020 and August of 2021. And the 71 unknowns in Phase 4 were disinterred between April and December of 2022. And as you know, we are currently in Phase 5, and Phase 5 began in October of 2023. And those projected unknowns are to be fully disinterred by the end of FY24, conditions permitting. And then also, conditions permitting, we are projected to begin Phase 6 in FY25. We have identified a total of 200, and this, as of yesterday, you all heard the new identification that was made. That was a Phase 3 disinterment. So we can now say that we have identified 226 unknowns from the Punchbowl cemeteries. 19 from Phase 1, 48 from Phase 2, and 10 from Phase 3. Anthropological, dental, DNA, isotope, and other analyses are ongoing, and more IDs will be made as the results of these analyses are returned. We continue to review all Punchbowl cases and have yet to be identified, and we look for new lines of evidence that we can use to make these identifications. Remains turned over by North Korea represent a large part of our project. Following a joint forensic review, which you are all very familiar with, when 55 boxes of human remains known as the K-55 were received by DPAA laboratory staff in Wonsan, North Korea in July of 2018. Twenty of those boxes in the K-55 assemblage were reportedly recovered in the Unsan, Kujang area, and the other 35 boxes were reportedly recovered from the East Chosin area. The remains, as you know, were heavily commingled and in poor condition. The boxes were presented as containing a single individual, but upon further analysis, anthropological analysis, and DNA testing, we found that most of those boxes contained several individuals, and that the remains of a single individual may be found across multiple boxes. Using a combination of DNA, isotopic, anthropological data, we estimated that there are approximately 250 individuals within those 55 boxes. More than 500 skeletal elements were originally received in those boxes. We believe that approximately 160 are our U.S. service members, and around 90 individuals are our foreign nationals. To date, 93 service members, U.S. service members, have been identified from the K-55 remains, and we have repatriated 88 sets of remains to South Korea. There are an estimated 69 individuals remaining in the K-55 assemblage that are believed to be U.S. service members. Some of these may represent the additional portions of some of the service members that we have already identified. Analysis and testing of these remains continues and is ongoing. We are also still conducting analyses on the remaining K-208 and Joint Recovery Operations remains. The K-208 group consists of 208 boxes that were turned over by North Korea in the early 1990s. Following these turnovers, DPAA-led teams conducted 33 joint recoveries to excavate sites in North Korea between 1996 and 2005. Based on DNA sequence data, approximately 700 individuals were represented by the K-208 boxes and the JRO recoveries, 500 of whom are believed to be U.S. service members. We have so far made 155 IDs from the K-208 boxes, One of those IDs was in July and was a case that was turned over to us in 1994. So we were finally able to make that identification, which was quite profound this year. We've also had 153 IDs from the JRO accessions and identified 39 individuals whose remains originated from both the K208 and the JRO, which altogether account for over half of the Korean War IDs that we have made. There's also some crossover between remains from the K208, the JRO, and the K55 boxes. We have so far identified one individual whose remains came from both a JRO and a K55 accession. And we have additional portions, as mentioned earlier, of individuals present in the K55 boxes, K208, and JRO accessions. There are an estimated 100 U.S. service members remaining in the K208 and JRO accessions. Our dedicated team, though, does continue to systematically review these accessions, looking for any additional lines of testing that we may be able to use to move these cases towards identification. We also continue to strengthen our partnership with MACRI, as you have heard over the course of the past 2 days. South Korea's Ministry of the National Defense Agency for Killed in Action, Recovery, and Identification through joint recovery operations and forensic reviews. We have received from MACRI around 38 sets of remains believed to belong to U.S. service members, and we have identified 11 of those. We, in turn, have repatriated over 300 sets of remains belonging to South Korean soldiers, resulting in 19 identifications. So in our remaining time today, I'm going to walk you through the laboratory's identification process and the different methods that we use to make identifications in our laboratory. The DPA laboratory is a multidisciplinary team. We have medical examiners, anthropologists, archaeologists, odontologists, evidence managers, DNA and dental technicians, life support investigators, quality assurance specialists, case coordinators, and administrative and support staff. We have 2 core labs, the main lab at Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam in Hawaii, and a satellite lab in Offutt Air Force Base, Nebraska. These laboratories and their forensic testing procedures are accredited by the American National Standards Institute, American Society of Quality National Accreditation Board. There we go. So at the DPA laboratory, identifications are made using multiple lines of evidence whenever possible. Only when all lines of evidence point to a single individual will an identification be made, and the identification is made to the exclusion of all other reasonable possibilities, and any discrepancies must and will be explained. Our laboratory recovery and identification process align with the highest standards and best practices in the field of human identification. And so what this slide represents, you have all of the different types of analyses that go into an identification, and the star in the middle represents that identification. So we have historical background, archaeology in those recoveries, material evidence analysis, forensic anthropology, DNA, and forensic odontology. When skeletal evidence is accessioned into the laboratory, the KWIP team, the first step is to clean those remains, if necessary. We'll take an inventory of what remains are present for analysis and determine what lines of evidence we can use towards an identification. During this process, we look for any signs that there are remains of more than one individual present. As many of you know, a lot of the assemblages that we receive, K55, K208, JRO, are commingled, heavily commingled, and then we've also found that our punch bowl cases are also commingled. So that is a crucial step in our analysis, and one of the first things that the anthropologist assesses is how many individuals are represented in a particular skeletal assemblage. Some of these indicators of commingling include duplicated bones or bones that are different in overall size and shape, and unlikely that they came from the same individual. We select elements to be sampled for DNA and isotope testing. We also note presence of anything that is suitable for other type of analyses, such as dental remains, clavicles and vertebrae for chest x-ray comparison. And we also use anthropological methods to generate what is known as a biological profile. So the biological profile of a set of skeletal remains includes information about the age of death of that individual, the biological sex of that individual, their ancestry, living stature, any trauma or pathology that might help us in assessing the cause of death. And we use those traits to narrow down a list of potential casualty matches to an individual for identification. This anthropological data, and in conjunction with our historical circumstances, the DNA information, and all of the other lines of evidence, narrows that pool down and allows us to make that identification. All right. Again, we nominate bones for DNA testing after that initial inventory and assessment of the entire assemblage. Most of the DNA testing we request produces a mitochondrial DNA sequence, which is not necessarily unique to the individual. Mitochondrial DNA is passed down from generation to generation through the maternal line, and the strength of that mitochondrial DNA as a line of evidence depends on how rare or how common that sequence is in the general population. Nuclear DNA, Y chromosomal, and autosomal DNA profiles can be statistically strong lines of evidence and can produce from the remains, and that comparative reference sample is, if that comparative reference sample is available. We compare these DNA results to the service member's family reference samples. We also use DNA results to exclude individuals as possible association to a set of remains. DNA testing is an extraordinarily useful in helping us make these identifications and assess commingling, but there are some limitations. Some of our missing service members do not have specific types of references on file for comparison. These references, again, are crucial to identification in many cases. If the remains have a very common mitochondrial DNA sequence, we cannot further narrow down that list of individuals who match without a nuclear family reference sample. Although we have good coverage, as you've heard from Dr. McMahon, about 8% of our missing Korean War service members have no family reference sample on file of any kind, and another approximately 18% have no nuclear reference. Finding samples for the service members who are lacking a mitochondrial or nuclear reference is critical in resolving the more challenging cases that we have at our laboratory. In some cases, remains do not produce usable DNA sequences. For instance, the remains at Punch Bowl have been treated with a chemical preservative in the 1950s in an attempt to preserve the remains. They were processed in the chemical, but unfortunately, this caused a degradation of the DNA. So for those cases, it can be incredibly difficult to extract usable DNA information from them. These samples undergo what's known as next-generation sequencing, a process that Dr. McMahon and his team at the Armed Forces DNA Identification Laboratory developed specifically for the remains in this condition, which has greatly improved our chances of success for extracting DNA from these Punch Bowl cases. I've spoken with many of you about this particular method over the past 2 days. Radiographic comparisons of skeletal elements can also be very useful and effective in identification. The DPAA laboratory developed this method to compare chest radiographs of the remains with the digitally archived X-rays of our missing service members that were taken to screen for the tuberculosis when they were inducted. A list of individuals for comparison can be created based on different criteria. It could be based on individuals whose loss location is consistent with the recovery location of the remains, or individuals whose dental records are consistent with what we have in the remains. So an analyst then goes in and they visually compare the ante-mortem X-ray that we have of our service member with the post-mortem x-ray of the remains once they come into the laboratory. And they will identify what we call items of concordance or items of similarity. And that's what you see here in the top image. That is an x-ray of remains that have come into the lab, and we have marked on that image all of the different points of concordance or the similarities that we see between that x-ray and the x-ray of a particular service member. And what we take it a step further in the cases where we have antemortem x-rays that are in really good condition and that we can see all of the elements. We will do a superimposition. So we'll take an overlay of the x-ray of the remains that we have in the lab, and we will superimpose that onto the x-ray of our service member, and they have to line up exactly for us to say that this is a potential match. And then that is another line of identification that we can use in narrowing a list of potential casualty matches to a single individual and making that identification. Dental records are also extremely important line of evidence in our cases. Teeth that are absent, teeth that have restorations or fillings can be matched to records on file for a particular individual. We don't always have dental radiographs on file for our service members, but we do have the dental charts that we can use for comparison. For dentition with rare patterns or restorations, a match to an antemortem dental record can be as good as a fingerprint. So as with DNA and chest radiograph comparison, dental comparison is another useful tool for exclusion for our individuals. And one of the newest areas of analysis that we are developing in the DPAA laboratory is forensic isotope analysis. Carbon and nitrogen isotope values from bones can provide information on dietary preferences, helping us determine whether a person had a Western diet in corn products. We use this information to classify remains as likely U.S. or likely foreign nationals, and that in turn helps us with our DNA sampling strategy. We also use stable isotope analysis to assess commingling. So if we get a set of remains in the lab and we suspect that maybe there were some skeletal exchanges going on in the 1950s, particularly for our punch bowl cases, or we see something that tells us that there might be more than one individual represented in a particular set of skeletal remains, what we can do is isotope testing, and then that actually happens in-house in the DPA laboratory, so it's faster and less expensive than DNA testing, and that is a method that we can use to further assess whether or not we have one individual present in that skeletal assemblage. We can also use this information. Dentition can be tested for oxygen isotope values of water that vary across landscape. As you move inland, water isotope ratios decrease. And then we can use that as well for individuals that might be associated with a particular set of remains. As we receive the results of these independent lines of inquiry, we compile those data, and then we look for a consensus that each of those lines of evidence are pointing to the same individual. Once we have overwhelming evidence that supports the association of that individual to the remains, then the individual is identified. The goal is achieved by diligent work of a dedicated and passionate team of professionals. The DPA laboratory and the Korean War Identification Project team continue to look for new and innovative ways to return your loved ones to you while maintaining our high scientific standards. I am honored to serve this mission of achieving the fullest possible accounting for our missing service members to you and to this nation. And so on the last slide here, we have a set of remains that was identified in the laboratory. And often we will, as the remains are leaving the lab, the DPA personnel that are in the office will meet outside at our laboratory's entrance, and we will line the entrance and say a final farewell to our service member and our hero as they are returned home. Thank you all very much for your time today. I look forward to speaking with you more, and please do not hesitate to come up if you have any questions. Thank you.
Captain Anderson?
Absolutely.
Go ahead. Cool.
You're not getting rid of me yet. So myself and Captain Patrick Anderson here will also be giving you a brief overview of the U.S. ROK Alliance in our field recoveries. So we're really excited to share with you what happens when our boots are on the ground and we are over in South Korea and we're doing the recoveries. How do we do that? What do we find? What is life like on a site in South Korea?
I'll just introduce myself, everyone. My name is Captain Anderson, and I'm assigned to the Expeditionary Support Directorate of DPAA. And in essence, that is the force provider for DPA. So about roughly 80 senior NCOs, mid-grade NCOs, and then captains mostly, and some field-grade officers that are responsible for deploying all over the globe and executing the missions that you see. Most of the pictures you see here are from Korea. I was the team leader or heavily involved in the planning of the last 4 missions in Korea, so really happy to show it and talk about it with you all.
Yeah.
Thank you, thank you. So most of the things you'll see is Korea, but one of my peers, Captain Uvard, he's actually in China right now doing the excavation and recovery mission that we've been talking about. As you all know, this is a big milestone for the agency, and we hope to leverage it for the losses in Korea and Cold War losses going forward. So what you see here on the right is a wet screen station. This is a pretty standard beginning of a construction of a wet screen system. And on the right, you see the locals from probably the local province that he's using to help construct that wet screen system. So really the big takeaway is as we sit here, we have recoveries for service members all over the globe. Just off the top of my head, I know that I have peers in France, Italy, Vietnam, and here in China, and it's going around yearly every month. So really happy to show you this. It's a big milestone for us. Thank you.
So again, today we're going to be talking to you about what a recovery field team looks like, what are our team members. We're also going to talk to you about what it's like getting to a site, the site arrival, the site setup, some field investigation techniques, and what an excavation is like. We'll also talk about recovering evidence, what happens when we recover evidence, life on a site, our host nation partnership with Macri. A little behind the scenes, and we will have a question and answer session at the end. Both Captain Anderson and I will be up here to answer any questions that you have in regards to field recoveries. In addition to being the Korean War Identification Project lead in the lab, I am also a scientific recovery expert, so I will be deployed on missions sometimes to do recoveries in the field as well.
So here is a bunch of descriptions of the individuals that we would bring on an investigation or recovery mission. So it would vary based off the mission requirements. Typically, the investigations are much smaller, and then based off the requirements and size of the recovery area, we would bring more of the individuals you see here. So at the top, you see team leader, team sergeant. These are typically your leadership of that investigation or recovery effort. Ultimately responsible for everything we do or fail to do on the mission, try to keep order and discipline going forward, and then accomplish whatever the objectives are for the recovery and investigation. Kristen just mentioned it, but as a team leader, my right-hand man or woman is our SRE. They are in charge of the site. As soon as we get to that recovery or excavation portion, they completely take over, and they are very methodical and detailed in our excavation efforts because everyone in here, trust me, you do not want a bunch of military guys deciding how to dig up the remains in these various countries. For the next one you see is life support investigator. We excavate a lot of plane crashes around the globe, and those individuals have very particular skills on they can literally take a piece of metal and tell you where and where was that part on a plane. They can tell you the type of plane, and they can tell you where that plane would have been during the war and maybe even the serial number with it. It's pretty incredible. So they come with us on a lot of the excavations regarding aircraft wreckage. EOD, pretty self-explanable, but the majority of the areas we go to have a pretty high UXO threat, so we are very methodical before we ever dig. We'll have EOD reps do a full sweep of every single unit or portion that we're going to dig, and then it's just an enhanced risk mitigation as we're going to every single site. Medics, also pretty self-explanatory. Doesn't matter where we go to some pretty austere places with no hospitals in sight, so our medics are very skilled and able to help in the event of an emergency. I do my best to keep them as bored as possible and not having to do anything except dig with us, but they're critical to our mission. Communications, we go to, like I said, very austere places that most of the time cell phone doesn't work, so we'll bring various communication packages with us to make sure we can communicate with our worldwide operations center in Hawaii. A lot of the pictures you see here are from our assigned photographers. They'll kind of capture the progress in all the events we do in every mission. Recovery NCOs, some of the sites are very large, so that's just extra manpower to help dig. Fun fact about all these missions, it does not matter your rank, you will be digging. It doesn't matter if you're a flag officer, a general officer, or a private. Everyone is expected to get into the recovery site and do their portion of digging to help find remains. You'll see a bunch of photos here from the recent recovery this past spring of large cliffside in Korea, and that required most of our mountaineers from the U.S Directorate. And so we have a big portion of mountaineers that are also assigned to ES. Can you go back, Wilson?
Yeah.
And then just the last points here. Obviously, we're working in different countries, so we have linguists and then the host nation officials. We've talked about MACRI. They're our partner agency, but it doesn't matter what country we go to. We have some sort of adjacent entity that allows us to work in their country and hopefully assist us in finding remains. You go ahead.
And I will just add, as Captain Anderson said, this SRE, or the scientific recovery expert, is the individual that is in charge of making all of the decisions regarding the science on site. But we could not do this mission, we could not complete this without a team leader to handle all of the logistics and coordinate everything. Everyone on that list that you see is an integral part of the team, and we rely on each individual's expertise to make these missions successful.
It doesn't really matter where your respective case or loss is on Earth. ES and DPAs, we're prepared and ready to go to find them. It doesn't matter whether it's in the water, on the side of a cliffside, or in a very austere island in the middle of nowhere. So we have the ability to jump on a C-17 loaded with dive equipment and a decompression chamber, climb the side of a cliff, as you see here, that was in Korea this summer, or rely on the Korean Navy out in Busan Harbor to do the first ever underwater investigation. This is some pictures here of the most recent recovery in Korea. So this was in the city of Monyeon. It was an aircraft wreckage that crashed into the side of a cliff during the Korean War. We haven't done a recovery there in a long time, so you can see some pictures here of the site setup. So once we've kind of secured the area, conducted some basic rehearsals, synchronized with, for this case, MACRI, our local officials, we'll begin construction of the actual site. So you saw pictures of China. That was a wet screen system, so we use high-pressure water to sift and screen all of the dirt in the site. This right here is the beginning of a dry screen setup, that wooden triangle structure. Same principle, we're taking every bit of dirt or material, sediment material, and clearing it until the SRE says it's good, and then we move on to the next portion. This particular site was extremely steep. We had a very complex rope system and mountaineers with us. When we tied in every single day, went up to the side of the cliff, and then had a bucket line down to conduct this recovery. This will continue next spring, and we'll hope to bring positive results from that.
So once we get into the field, we're either there to conduct a field investigation or an excavation. And so for our field investigation techniques, that could mean going through all of the historical documentation and figuring out if there are any potential witnesses that maybe we want to get in contact with while we're there. And we'll sit down and talk to them and see if they can provide us with any more information about the site or that particular loss incident. We might also do some what is known as phase 1 testing in archaeology. So we might do some site survey, work with our EOD technicians to do metal detector survey, just to get a greater idea of what is present in the area. And then we'll take that information back, and then a team can be built later to come back and do an actual excavation. And so during our actual excavations, as Captain Anderson mentioned earlier, we don't just go into the field and dig holes. We use a very systematic approach to digging, and it follows standard archaeological techniques. And so we record everything from beginning to end, photographs, field notes. All of that is recorded. We actually build out a grid system that allows us to keep provenience of where anything that is determined to be probative or evidence that we're going to bring back with us. We know exactly where that came from at the site. And then that allows us to keep that information, but also if for some reason we need to go back to that site at a later date, we know the next recovery team knows exactly where we've been and exactly where we were finding the most evidence, so they know where to start when they get there. And then part of that excavation, I don't know if we do have a photo on the top of our screening procedures. So once the sediment is removed from a particular unit within that grid that we have established, it's sent to a screening station. All of the sediment is screened, and this is typically where the gold is, where we find our evidence, our material. So we have our U.S. team, and then also our counterparts also help us with the screening process. And so anything that they find that might be probative, they'll bring to the SRE, the scientific recovery expert, and then that individual will say, yes, this is possible bone, this is possible human bone, possible material evidence that might be able to link a set of remains to a particular service member. Life support equipment, as you heard earlier, any equipment that would have been on that individual. All of that is really, really useful in making that identification. So before we go into the field, because the SRE can't be at all of the places at once, they can't be at the unit, they can't be at the screening station, we give our teams training before we get into the field on what these types of things look like. And so anytime they find something, they'll bring it to us. And it might not always end up being actual osseous material, it might be rocks. That's okay too. We want them to bring everything to the SRE, and then we'll make the decisions about what we need to retain. So what happens when we do find evidence? Again, the evidence, or what is believed to be evidence, is provided to the SRE, and then they'll take a look and make a decision about whether or not they want to keep that if it actually is evidence. And sometimes in the field it can be really difficult to tell if a piece of material is probative. But even if we think that there is any potential that it could be, we're going to retain that and bring it back with us. And so in our situations when we are collaborating and working with MACRE on these recovery sites, if anything is recovered, we have what is known as a joint forensic review after, with scientists from DPAA and MACRE both look at this material together and make a decision about whether or not we should bring this back to our DPAA laboratory for further testing. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. So just a little glimpse into like what a day-to-day would look like on a recovery site. I'll use the most recent recovery in Munyon as an example. Once you get to the site, the first thing you do, particularly for this site, is you want to check your equipment. With all the rope systems, we would send 2 to 3 individuals, our mountaineers, to the top and bottom, checking our rope systems to make sure that everything's safe and working before we begin our recovery. Depending on the SRE's guidance, we might do a new sweep on a new unit that we're about to dig. Once we've kind of got our equipment ready, the EOD's giving us the green light to dig, we confirm with the SRE if she wants us to dig, and that's pretty much it. We're doing that for the next 8 to 9 hours, depending on what's going on. For this particular site, and this isn't always the case, but we had some Republic of Korea soldiers with us helping us dig and screen the entire time. So we'd usually have 2 people in what we would call the pit or the unit. They're digging the entire time. Buckets and they're not digging here. They're on the side of a cliff kind of passing buckets down, but same principle. Digging, buckets are going down. As the buckets get to the screening system, that's when, as Kristen described, going to be sifting and screening all the material there, looking for evidence to hopefully bring home and to help make an identification. Just some highlights here. As you can see, the pictures, the left side is just recovery pictures, and the EOD working in the bottom left. Those are pin flags identifying metal material. Doesn't necessarily mean it's UXO, but it could be aircraft wreckage. That was the particular thing we were interested at this last recovery site. In the top right, that was from the underwater investigation. We had, I don't know how, the Republic of Korea and Macri are so supportive, but they actually gave us 3 Navy vessels to use for this underwater investigation. And you're probably wondering, why was the Army captain the team leader for this small little naval fleet we got going on? I was thinking the same thing, didn't totally feel as qualified to be in charge of this Navy group, but they did a great job, and they were extremely supportive and obviously didn't listen to my naval recommendations. And then finally, this is from one of our previous investigations. It was actually up in the CCZ. We were looking at a possible aircraft wreckage that Macri identified near some of their defensive perimeters within the CCZ, and you could get up just high enough to actually look down into North Korea. So it was quite interesting in that investigation.
And just to add, as Captain Anderson said, not all sites are the same. So as you can imagine, some of our sites are relatively flat. Some of our sites are on extreme slopes. And so each one is different, and each one presents its own challenges. We also have to work with extreme weather conditions sometimes. It can be extremely cold, extremely hot. We have all kinds of critters that we're running into. So these sites produce all kinds of interesting scenarios, but we just continue to push through because we're all there as a team and all there for the mission and the same goal is hopefully to bring something home. And again, as Captain Anderson said, we have, as you already know, a wonderful working relationship with Macri and in the lab and in the field. So we are continuing to go on these recoveries and work with their team of scientists who also practice the best scientific techniques and recovery techniques.
And I just want to express, from my experience in Korea, but I've also worked in other countries of doing recoveries, investigations, Macri is like an absolute professional organization that wants to produce results and find the remains of U.S. service members, Korean service members, and then all the other nations that were involved in the Korean War. And that's not always the case. Sometimes our partners agencies are just there to be with the Americans and profit off of our arrival. But the Koreans are the utmost professionals, and I look forward to going back working with them again. And then I just want to close out with a little behind the scenes, just kind of the attitude from the active duty service member of working in Korea and conducting this mission. This is the only assignment that the majority of us have in ES where there's no argument about the intent or the objective or the mission of this unit or agency. Sometimes you work for an active duty company where you understand the mission, but you don't necessarily agree with it. We should be doing this task instead of this one. But everyone within the agency, not just ES, but all the civilians and service members included, can absolutely get behind this objective. And it is, frankly, we're the most lucky soldiers, airmen, Marines, and sailors to have this job. So we look forward to going back to Korea. Me and Kristen should be there next April, and we'll continue this investigation on your behalf. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Can we all hear me? All right, I'm going to walk. I'm Irish, and I talk with my hands. So usually when I'm up there, I'll hit the microphone, and we all don't want that to occur. So I am Tim McMahon. I'm the Director of DNA Operations for the Armed Forces Medical Examiner System. So I'm going to talk a little bit about who we are. So we, believe it or not, we are separate from the Defense POW Accounting Agency, or the DPAA. We actually fall under the Defense Health Agency. And we are DOD's, Department of Defense's, only human remains DNA testing laboratory. So I do all testing for all current day losses, as well as our past accounting mission. We are not in any place glamorous like Hawaii. We are in Dover, Delaware. We do get maybe 2 snowstorms a year, 3 or 4 inches at a time. But if you are local and you would love to see the DNA lab, at the end, you will have my email address. Email me, and I will coordinate a visit for you. We'd love to have you come up and see who we are. So as I said, I am part of the Armed Forces Medical Examiner System. We are an accredited laboratory just like the DPAA's lab. And basically, what does that mean? I'm accredited to the same standards as your state and local crime lab, as well as the FBI's. And basically, I just went through it. I had 14 scientists from other crime labs around the country come in and spend 5 days in my lab going through all of our procedures and policies, and they found 2 items of improvement and granted us our accreditation again. So, what I'm going to talk about is an over 30-year partnership with the DPAA and how we assist with bringing our fallen heroes home. So in a nutshell, we're processing about 3,000 specimens. So you heard they cut a bone sample, send it to my lab. We process about 3,000 of those a year to report out 3,600 analyses. You're probably thinking, well, Doc, you got a degree, the math doesn't add up. Well, as we talk, one sample could get up to 3 different tests. So that's why we have more analyses than samples processed. As we all know, these times of samples, they range from 50 to 80 years, and we're going to talk today about how challenging they are. You heard that they are chemically treated, and that chews the DNA up. Well, soil conditions play a role in it. Bacterial, fungal, parasitic DNA come into it. And so we've had to develop a number of methods. Okay, so originally, mitochondrial DNA, we talked about that, and absolutely correct. When you think about mitochondrial DNA, I want you to think about a clock. It's circular, and we used to look at a region between 11 and 1. And in between that region, my mitochondrial DNA sequence matches 7% of all Caucasians. So 87% of the mitochondrial DNA sequences are unique, 13% are more common. But now we can look at the whole mitochondrial genome, and everyone differs. So we've developed all these new methods. So what do? We look at mitochondrial DNA, which comes from the mom first, and then as needed, we will look at Y chromosome DNA. That's on the father side. And then we can look at, just like CSI. Any CSI fans here? Yeah, okay, yeah. We can look at autosomal short tandem repeats and basically look at brothers and sisters and do sibling tests, grandchildren, because they share a quarter of their DNA. So there's a lot of different ways that we can do DNA. But the question we always get is, why does it take time? Well, all of the instruments for DNA forensics and all of the kits are geared toward modern-day crime scene samples. So first, our quality and quantity of DNA is not nearly like a whole drop of blood found at a crime scene. We're dealing with stuff that's been in the environment for 80 years. So the bottom line is we either have to modify what's out there, or 90% of the time, we have to develop something new that's not out there at all. So the bottom line is we move forward on this, is we're going to develop and implement. Now you may hear a certain word here again, hint, there may be a test at the end of the day here, but fit for use, okay? You know, usually my wife says I don't need to buy that new tool, and I tell her, no, it's fit for use. The one I have just really doesn't work, so I got to get this one. So that's what I want everyone to think about, is fit for use. My talk is going to be different this year from the last 3 or 4 years if you heard it. I'm going to talk about what we bring to the table and how we differ from what you hear on the news or what you may see in your state and local crime lab. So when you think about fit for use, the question you have is, does the circumstances drive your testing, or does your testing drive the circumstances? Now, in a crime lab, it's pretty simple. Circumstance drives testing. I have a sexual assault. I know I do these tests. For us, the answer is both. So it's a combination of both sample selection, the recovery circumstances, because the DPA knows the recovery samples. They are awesome at selecting the samples for us. But based on that, that may drive our testing. Is it chemically treated? Is it non-chemically treated? Is it coming from a World War II site? Is it a Korea site? So you can see how we differ. We have to look at all of that. So when we go into it, the sampling is actually driven by the DPA scientists, so they know all of that. I'm going to work in the blind. They're going to tell us this is a chemically treated sample. So we're like, okay, we're going to kick it down this route, and we're going to do that. Why am I successful? Because I've had 30 years to collaborate with the DPAA on what samples work the best and why. And so that's how we set up for success. The other part is where, when you think about it, on a skeleton, are you going to select? That plays a role. You have more dense bone in your legs and your arms, they have more DNA. But we may not have that. So we have to develop methods that will allow us to work with every bone that's out there. And the fact is, we don't have the choice to choose from a whole skeleton sometimes. We get whatever the DPA can send to us. So up until 2006, our success rates were only 90% for heavy bones. But in 2006, we developed a method that we could dissolve the bone completely for the first time. And it allowed us to get any DNA. So the skeleton you see here now, it's pretty much all in green. That allowed us, for one method, which we were doing in 2006, the mitochondrial DNA sequencing, we had over a 90% success rate across any bone in the body. Okay? So that was really good. However, if you're dealing with your normal lab, they bring a new method online, they get rid of their old method. We don't have that luxury. We have to be flexible. Okay? And the reason for that is we never know how that bone's going to react, because every bone is different that we get from the DPAA. So again, remember I told you, like my wife says, I don't need that tool, and I keep arguing, yeah, the more tools I have, the greater the success I can have. So when we extract the DNA, it's very simple. If it's a bone, we use a very high-tech tool that you see there. It's called a Dremel tool. The same one. And we will sand the outer side of that bone. We want to remove as much dirt and contamination as we can. We wash it. We grind it into a powder. We add our buffer that dissolves it completely. And then we purify the DNA out of it. What you see on the right side of the screen is a tooth. A normal lab will take the whole tooth, throw it into a grinder, grind it up, and that's it. The tooth is gone. We're going to dissolve it. However, sometimes the tooth is the only thing that we get. So what we do is we cut around the crown, pop it open, and drill out the inside so that we can return the tooth back to the family. So it's a different way of doing things, okay? This looks busy. Anyone a computer or program manager here? This is kind of your feedback chart. What I want you to understand here is we have 4 different extraction methods online now. And the reason for that is they all drive different success rates with how we analyze a bone. And I'm going to talk about why, because it gives us the ability to choose what extraction gives us the greatest chance of getting a result from that bone, fit for use. All right. For example, the USS Oklahoma. We were going to use that new protocol that we dissolved the bone completely. It turned every bone into 90% success rate. So we used it on the USS Oklahoma. Those bones had been soaked in coal oil, and so they were tough to sand. But as you can see, when we did the extractions, the oil that was left in there actually bound to the magnetic bead, and we were losing DNA. So we had to go back to our original extraction method to make that sample work. And because of that, we had over a 94% success rate with generating DNA profiles, and it helped to identify 362 of 389 missing service members. So again, if we had taken the other one offline, we would not have been able to do this. Okay? Again, fit for use. So what types of DNA and what do we use? All right. That big blue blob in the center is nuclear DNA. I want you to think of it as the operating system. So that's the Windows 11 of your cell. It's going to tell your body what to do. It's going to tell you how tall you're going to be, how fast you're going to go gray, 26, all that good stuff. Those little squiggly organelles in there are your AAA batteries. Those are called mitochondria, and they produce the energy from your cell. So where I have one nuclear copy, I can have hundreds of mitochondrial DNA copies per cell. So in the early days, 1994, that's why we led with mitochondrial DNA. It was very easy to get results from that. But now we can get results from both sides. There we go. So we have multiple testing methods up top. Okay, so we can do mitochondrial sequencing. That's the one we've been doing since 1990. I can do next generation whole mitochondrial genome sequencing. Those are the ones for the chemically treated samples. I can do the same one your state and local crime lab does to look at paternity, so grandchildren, brothers, sisters, and things like that. I can do low copy Y chromosomal STR, so that's how I can trace the paternal lineage. And then I'm going to talk about our future, the single nucleotide polymorphism. We talked a little bit about that yesterday as forensic investigative genetic genealogy, or FIG. So not the FIG for DPAA, but a new one. So when we think mitochondrial DNA, again, I talked about that. We can trace anyone on the maternal lineage, hundreds of copies, very easy to get a result. You heard about some of the drawbacks to the mitochondrial DNA, that it has a common sequence. However, when you're dealing with a closed population, like we are in recoveries, it could be a common sequence, but if you have 4 people associated with that loss, and they all have a different mitochondrial DNA sequence, you can make an identification. We developed methods that allowed us to go for smaller pieces of DNA, and so it's very, very sensitive for us. So we lead with mitochondrial DNA. The reason for that is, if I gave you a 5,000-piece puzzle and I took out all the border pieces and I said, go ahead and put that puzzle together, you'd all want to kill me. So think of mitochondrial DNA, because we have the most family references for that in all of our conflicts. That allows us to establish the borders. We provide information to the DPAA. We start to include, exclude people, and then we'll use other tests to finally key in on who that person may be. So again, I jumped through my slides because I'm, talking, thinking in my head. It is a great way for us to also segregate commingled remains. So we can take bones that have the same sequence and put them together, and then that can help us figure out where to go next. Okay? So it's kind of like if I had 300 Skittles and they were different colors, but I was blind in there covering my eyes, we now have a mechanism to pull them out into the right areas. Okay, so we use mitochondrial DNA to establish those borders, to identify common elements, and then we work from there. So it is, for us, it is one of the what we call a lower tech style. It's very easy for us to do. it costs a little bit more, and it's time consuming because we have to do lots of different things multiple times to get to the answer that we want. So we're going to talk about mitochondrial next generation sequencing at this point. All right, chemically treated samples. So on the right side of your screen, again, dyslexic, so chemically treated samples there, you can see a yellow box, and there appears to be no DNA in that box. On the left side, that is a normal non-chemically treated sample. Within that box, you can see there are DNA. We call it 120 base pairs. That's a method that anyone can get results from. When we go to the chemically treated, you see the average size of the DNA is about 47 base pairs, and there's nothing in that 120 base pair range. Well, that's what modern testing can do. So with the chemically treated, once we knew what the size was, we could develop a method. So this is the method, okay? The left side is the science gook. This is how we do it. The right side is how Dr. McMahon explains it. Okay, you got that jar of jelly beans, right? The white jelly beans are human. The other colored jelly beans is everything else out there, parasitic, bacterial, fungal. If I told you to reach into that jar in one time and grab all the human DNA, you wouldn't be able to do it. But we went fishing. We developed a specific molecule, or bait, that would bind to the human DNA, and it would have a metal molecule on it. And then we put a magnet next to it, and we pull the human DNA out, or we enrich for it. That allowed us to get the DNA from these chemically treated samples. But how damaged truly are these samples? Well, Dr. Marshall, my deputy director who is here, we went right over there. Just before COVID, I sent her to the Max Planck Institute where they study Neanderthal DNA. And she took some of our samples over there. And contrary to their thinking that our samples would not be as damaged as 40,000-year-old Neanderthal DNA, if you look at the screen here, you can see the amount of human DNA is less than 40,000-year-old, the purple bars. And then if you look at the average length, it's about the same size. So our DNA coming out of these punch bowl samples are as damaged as 40,000-year-old Neanderthal DNA, which is why it took us 16 years to 2016 to develop a method to go after these. But now we can do those. So we are now gone in basically 7 years. We have gone from 4 samples per month to 120 samples per month. We've gone from a 24% success rate to a 68% success rate. And overall, across all conflicts, we have written 405 first-time named BTB reports. So those are reports that will assist in the identification, a new identification of one of our fallen heroes. So this method has really changed the game. It is what is being used in the phases for the punch bowl samples that we're going through there. So again, very strong, gives me the whole genome, high discrimination rate, but time consuming again. It takes about 2 weeks per sample, and we have to do everything in duplicate to make sure we get the right answer. So let's talk a little bit about autosomal STRs. Simple thing. Short tandem repeats allow us to trace lineage. So I want you to think of a tree. I stand at the base of the tree is the thickest. I have half the DNA of my mom and dad. As I go up the tree, it thins. I have a quarter of the DNA of my grandparents because I have maternal and paternal grandparents. An eighth of the DNA of my great-grandparents because I have 2 sides there. So that's identity by descent. When you think about siblings, other than me, who's an identical twin, everyone who has a sibling, think of a branch next to the tree. You share 50% of your DNA with your sibling. You go to your first cousin, you share 12% of your nuclear DNA. So we don't follow modern crime scene sample where, you take that nuclear DNA from the suspect and the crime scene sample, because for us, most of our references are first cousins, and we would have to have 5, 6, 7 of those to get the same result as a mitochondrial DNA from a sister or anything like that. And these kits are standardized use for crime labs. However, it does make a difference. So you saw the organic extraction that we talked about first, that mitochondrial Sanger sequencing organic extraction allowed us 100% success rate, 90%. When we went to that organic extraction, you could see the bones were in the blue and about a 60% success rate. So we had to develop a new method to purify the DNA to increase our success rate. So we took the idea of what goes on with a Brita water filter. You know, you got a water filter there, you put the not so nice water in, it takes everything out that you don't want, you get clean water. Well, we have a filter that binds the DNA, we wash away what we don't want, and we get pure DNA. And now you can see on the where it says autosomal STR minifilar inorganic extraction, we now are getting 90% success rate or more on elements. So again, fit for use. We had to develop a method that would work for our samples. So when we think about why STRs, again, that's a lineage marker. It's what's passed down from the father to the missing service member. And if the missing service member had a brother, they have the same Y chromosome. That brother will pass it down to the nephew and down that line. So we can use anyone on that paternal side. Okay, and it works really well. But we had to make our own method for it. We had to increase how we copy the DNA so that we could make it work for us. And we brought that online in 2014. And it has been being used since then to assist with a lot of the K208 and the K55 samples. And again, this is just to show you if we had taken off one extraction method over another, we wouldn't get the results that we need to. So we keep all of those extractions and use it based on the test that we need to do. So what's the future hold, right? We heard we only have a maternal DNA reference. It may have a common sequence. We have damaged DNA that won't work with short tandem repeats. So where do we go next? All right. Anyone done Ancestry.com 23andMe? All right. So we tried that. We tried the exact same test that they did in 2017, and instead of 850,000 markers, we got 40,000 markers. It wasn't going to work. So we asked, could we use that technology? So SNP, single, N, nucleotide, P, polymorphism is a very fancy scientific word to say difference, okay? So within your body, you have hundreds of thousands, millions of these SNPs or differences. Well, we just want to look at specific ones. We want to look at those who make you who you are, like identity, who you're related to, and what your ancestry is. When you think about 23andMe and Ancestry.com, they look at not only how many of those SNPs, those yellow markers, you have in common, but they also look, like the green ones are ones in common, they're also looking at how long, or what we call a fancy word, how contiguous. So think of an apple orchard, right? If I have one apple tree, I don't get a lot of apples. But if I have one apple tree and I have a row that is a half a mile long, I get a lot of apples out of that. So it's not only how many of those markers you have, it's how long they are. Well, that's great if I'm taking a cheek swab from me. But when I deal with other DNA, our DNA, I'm not going to have that, right? We just talked about it being all degraded. So what we asked was, is there anybody out in the commercial world who could write a computer program for us and who can develop a method that regardless of your relationship, I don't care if you're maternal or paternal at this point, I want you to be within 4 generations of the missing service member. Okay, so 4th degree relative. Great aunt or uncle, first cousin once removed. Why did I ask that? That matches 97% of the references I have on hand that we've collected since 1991. So it would make everybody a nuclear reference now. So it was awarded to Parabon. And because our DNA is degraded, we can't look at those contiguous pieces. We have to look at the individual SNPs, or those differences. Really big word, right? We're just going to call them differences. We're going to look at those differences. And I told you I tried the commercial kit, and it didn't work. But this is a year after we solved the chemical treatment with the fishing, right? We went fishing. We did a capture assay. We captured the human, magnetic, pulled it out. We did the exact same here. We identified 94,000 markers. We made baits out of those. So we made our fishing baits. And we go in and we sequence through those. It took 6 years. I stood here last year saying, I hope that we would have it on in October. I have to beg your pardon. It's going to probably be November, December, because as Dr. Marshall was crunching the data and writing it up, we found some modifications we had to make to the algorithm to tighten it up. So we didn't want to bring something online that wasn't going to work. But what you see in this is when you look at the average insert size, that's the size of the DNA that we've captured. And it very well correlates to the ability for that assay or that SNP team assay to work. And so what for the first time we're going to be able to do is take those capture mitochondrial DNA, the one that we developed in 2016. We're going to be able to take those results, and based on those results, we're going to be able to predict what bones will work in our SNP method. So again, pinpointing, fit for use. So we're not testing every bone. We're going to test the bones that give us the answer and give us the ability to help DPAA. So one of the things, to give you an idea of, if I told you science geek language, right? We're going to go to science geek language here really quickly. The world's population is represented as 9.6 E, capital E to the ninth, so exponential ninth. That basically is 9.6 billion people. So when you look at this tree, sample O1A and O2A is our unknown service member. Sample 5A is a full sibling reference that we had. Samples 6A and 7A are a niece and nephew. So when you look at sample O1A and 2A compared to self, you're seeing that it is an E to the 1,261. Remember, the world's population is E to the ninth. This is 1,000. So those two bones are associated. When you look at sample 5 to a full sibling, it's E to the 264th. So that's almost 30 times the world's population. So that statistic is definitely that service member. That's going to be the strength of this test as we go on. It will switch it into a more definitive identification. So, and we do this by likelihood ratio. It's X many times more likely. So it's great to say that it's 264 quintillion times more likely that it's this individual. So now we've talked about the future testing. We've talked about all the DNA tests. So this is what differs, how we differ from your state, local, university labs out there. We don't stop at one method. We don't stop at one testing. We will test until, if we report to the DPA that there is no DNA there or we cannot get a result, I can guarantee you there's no lab in the world that's going to be able to do that. Okay. So the biggest things to take home is it's not static. You have to have a very diverse tool set to be able to adapt to the tissue or the bone and teeth samples that you get. You have to keep everything that you validate, like we have validated, meaning that we can do it for a court of law, on hand. And then here's the big one. For Korea, we provide the DPA with a mass comparisons chart that registers every sequence that we have developed for every sample that we've tested since 1992. And for samples that don't work, every time we bring on a new method, we revisit that. and we start looking at samples that didn't work, and they may submit it to us, they may say, well, let's see what your new technology brings online. If we get a new reference, that reference is automatically searched against all of the sequences that we've generated. So it's a constant flow for us and how we support the DPAA. So what can I promise you? These are individuals that have been identified since I stood up here last year and talked to you all. What I can promise from my lab is I have 177 scientists. 100 of those are dedicated to the past accounting mission, and that we will never give up. We will continue to push the bounds of science, and if it's not there, we will develop a method. That SNP method we bring online, we will be 10 years ahead of your state and local crime labs. So again, remember, what are the 3 words that we've been talking about today? Fit for use, yes. So, all right, there's my email address. I know I talked about a lot of stuff here. What I can promise you is if you email me, it may not be that day, but I will get back to you. More than likely, I will ask for a phone number to call you directly, and we'll have that conversation to answer your questions. So again, honored like everyone else. Thank you very much for your attention.
All right, so now we're going to have Zach Matuszewski from the research section of Partnerships and Innovation.
Thank you. Wow, what an incredible set of presentations that we've had so far today. So I just want to say it is my great pleasure to be able to address you all today. Before I begin, I want to thank the Partnerships and Innovation research team for helping me develop these remarks. I also want to thank the Korea team and Outreach and Communications for their support of Korean War partner research. It's great to collaborate with these crews, and as you'll find out as I speak today, it would be impossible for us to do the work that we do without the leadership, direction, and support of the Korea team and Outreach and Communications. My current role at the DPAA is part of the Henry Jackson Foundation for the Advancement of Military Medicine support for the DPAA's Partnerships and Innovation Directorate. My formal role is the lead for Partnerships and Innovation's research team, which manages a variety of research partnerships for DPAA. It is a privilege to speak to you all today. As you see on your schedule, Mr. Rocky Gillette could not be here due to unforeseen circumstances, so it is my honor to speak in his stead. My personal research background in Korean War research led me to support the DPAA. From the summer of 2017 to 2021, I had been extremely fortunate to support the DPAA's efforts as the inaugural DPAA Research Partner Fellow at the Ohio State University, where I focused on topics related to the Korean War and Cold War. On an academic note, I earned my PhD in Korean War history from Brandeis University in 2015. All through this time, I have researched and published on Korean War and Cold War topics with presses or journals associated with the U.S. Marine Corps, U.S. Air Force, and U.S. Navy, as well as popular venues including the Washington Post, Cold War International History Project, and George Marshall Foundation. In fact, if you open up winter of 2024's issue of U.S. Marine Corps History, there's an article about the Incheon operation that I wrote. You might be interested if you're interested in that operation. In any case, throughout all that time, it has been my distinct honor to be able to meet Korean War veterans and their families, and do what I can to honor Korean War losses. In a word, it has been an incredible experience for me this weekend to meet with so many families of Korean War losses. It's unreal for me. My goal today is discuss. Wrong way. My goal today is discuss the Partnerships and Innovation Directorate, or PI for short. This directorate seeks to build partnerships with subject matter experts in universities, museums, and other institutions. The partnerships and innovation efforts reflect the DPA's desire to do everything it can to advance the cause of bringing home the unaccounted for. Hopefully, over the course of this weekend, you've realized this agency is throwing out all the stops. And part of that involves working with partners. Part of that involves working with anybody that might have some knowledge, subject matter experts across the country. This is an amazing, dynamic organization to be a part of. Now, that being said, I want to say that while no one knows more about each of these losses than the internal researchers that work with families this conference, DPA has a robust partnership program focused on strategic development, research initiatives, and innovation studies. In close collaboration and communication with internal agency researchers and complementary to those efforts, the Partnerships and Innovation Directorate works as a liaison between outside experts and the internal staff who move cases forward. As this slide indicates, research partners expand capabilities and capacities, bring unique skill sets and expertise, help internal researchers integrate cutting-edge technologies, practices, and procedures into DPA's work. But above all, they enhance DPA's efforts. Partners work at the direction of agency stakeholders. No one, and I really mean this, no one is as dedicated to bringing home the unaccounted for as the internal researchers of the DPA, with the exception of the families here. As such, they are always in the driver's seat on projects to help us serve the core mission of the agency. So these are not researchers running off to do their own thing. They're not researchers running off to learn the coolest thing about the Korean War. These are researchers who are dedicated to serving families and bringing home the unaccounted for. I'm going to go to the next slide. Whoop, wrong one. All right. As this map indicates, this is a worldwide effort, with partners across the United States supporting DPA research. One key partner effort is the Hub and Spoke program. This program involves bringing in PhD-level researchers and other experts from 17 different universities and museums into the research effort. Following an onboarding process, Hub and Spoke Fellows are assigned to work on a portfolio of projects designed and led by internal DPA researchers. Again, I want to underscore, the internal researchers are calling the shots with this. Partnerships and Innovation Director personnel support this collaboration by reviewing research products for quality, handling research questions, and other tasks so that internal Korean War researchers can maximize their time they spend on researching and bringing home unaccounted for. There's no graduate class about how to do this work, so there are going to be some common questions. Rather than waste the time of the Korean War researchers, that's PI Directorate handles that. So we really have thought about how we can make this work, get the most out of this program without having any hampering towards the mission of what the Korean War researchers are trying to do. By doing this, the agency is able to bring in cutting-edge research from outside the agency without increasing the burden on internal staff. Common outcomes for research efforts include analytical studies directed by internal staff, maps that respond to internal staff requests, and data extraction of personnel files of people who served in the Korean War that might say something about the unaccounted for losses. Over the big picture of partnering, including all the wars that the DPA is focused on, partners have worked on products that relate to tens of thousands of losses. As of today, our research projects have created case-specific reports on over 500 unaccounted for losses and have digitized over 100,000 pages of paper archival records that were selected by the internal staff. This material can all be used to bring home our unaccounted for and serve families. Advancing Korean War and Cold War research has been at the center of partnering since the earliest days of the Hub and Spoke program specifically and partnering in general. Key internal Korean War researchers, including the head of Korean War research, Dr. Dawn Berry, were at the heart of the design and execution of the Hub and Spoke program. Dr. Berry and another outstanding Korean War researcher, Dr. Katie Schroeder, both of whom have addressed KCWs in the past, and other Korean War subject matter experts worked hard to establish policies and procedures that leverage the best practices in project management to build wide-ranging research projects that are designed to serve the cause of bringing home the unaccounted for. I was wondering, I just want to give a shout out to Dr. Berry and Dr. Schroeder. I'm not sure if they're in the room, but they were really transformative for this program and for my life personally, so I really appreciate their work. In plain terms, the projects that are initiated follow a clear path with multiple checks to make sure the mission is being advanced. Partner research, and I really want to underscore this, partner research is not research for research's sake. We're not sending people to write a history of the chosen reservoir that just focuses on the geography of the chosen reservoir and tells us nothing about the unaccounted for. That is not what these partner research projects are about. These partner research projects are tied very, very closely to the needs of finding unaccounted for. Now let's get to specifics. Who is doing partner research right now in 2024 for PI? As mentioned, I was the fellow at Ohio State University from 2017 to 2021. In that role, I learned about what the agency does and how scholars can support the agency. My specific work involved conducting oral histories with Korean War veterans, collecting data on over 500 accounted for losses from the war, and writing a research report on the July 1953 Pork Chop Hill campaign. When my tenure came to an end, I transitioned to the research team. Dr. Brandon Tashko served as the next Korean War researcher. Brandon, could you stand up and just let people know? I think he's been introduced before, but there's Brandon, who's joined our team. So a little bit about Brandon. Dr. Brandon Tashko holds a PhD in world history from the University of Hawaii. As the inaugural DPA Research Partner Fellow at George Mason University from 2021 to 2024, he utilized the extensive resources of George Mason's Roy Rosenzweig Center for History and New Media to further develop projects I had supported, while also taking on new initiatives. Dr. Tashko, these initiatives include a research project on unaccounted for losses from the DMZ area. To be frank, there isn't much on this actual specific topic outside of what the DPA has collected. Dr. Tashko, at the direction of DPA researchers, collected documents, analyzed personnel files, and other records to create visualizations and written reports on the effort to find Americans near the 38th parallel. We now have many hundreds of pages of material from the National Archives that internal researchers expressed an interest in. To give you an idea of how this happened, an internal researcher said, "This is a box I would like scanned. I think it's going to be relevant to the DMZ." Honestly, if you don't have the specialized knowledge that the internal researchers have, it would be very hard to find this box. Brandon went, found the box, and has scanned it and has exploited it so that we can understand exactly where recoveries were done in the 1950s. I want to understand what this all means and what that particular aspect means. We can use the pages that Brandon scanned to better see how remains were recovered and answer questions like, where did Army Graves Registration recovery teams go? Are there places they didn't go? How were remains handled? And how do remains get home from Korea? These are questions DPA researchers have been asking for many years and welcomed additional support on. Dr. Tashko's contribution was to find documents, offer a second pair of eyes on documents, and support the Korean War researchers' intrepid investigations. And as you've heard earlier, he has joined the research team as a non-government employee working for the Henry Jackson Foundation, and he works pretty much exclusively on Korean War-related work. Today, the main hub and spoke partner working on Korean War research is the inaugural Florida State University DPA Research Partner Fellow, Dr. Sungmin Jang. Dr. Jang is from South Korea. After serving in the South Korean Army, he earned a certification in geographic information systems and his doctoral degree from the University of Connecticut in Korean War geography. His doctoral research involved the analysis of maps during the war. Before joining the DPA partnering effort, he worked on a historical geographic information system project at the Research Institute of Korean Studies at Korea University in Seoul. In summary, and make it very simple, Dr. Jang really knows a lot about maps, how to build them, how to work with them, and how to use them to showcase trends, patterns, and broad information sets. This complements internal agency staff well, as there are many insightful maps that have been developed in DPA over the years using some innovative methods. The other institutions identified on this slide, namely University of Wisconsin-Madison, Texas A&M University, Texas Tech University, East Carolina State University, and the University of Southern Mississippi, support a different problem set. Researchers at these universities work with outreach and communication staff to help develop profiles of individual Korean War unaccounted for on the DPA website. In discussing each of the people who have contributed to the research effort, I have reviewed some of the projects. In this listing, you can see how researchers have supported gathering new information and analysis on a variety of projects. One that I want to highlight is the Korean War Enhanced Roster of the Dead. This long-standing database project piloted and developed by internal researchers to better utilize personnel files of unaccounted for losses from the Korean War helps us have a better understanding of the chain of custody of remains. Inside of the files of the accounted for are maps and other information. Additionally, drawing on this data, we can see how remains traveled across Korea. Seeing a chain of custody can help make connections and correlations that could advance cases in new ways. To gather this data, each accounted for person's file needs to be opened and reviewed. Each of these files range from 10 pages to 150 pages or more. The pages often contain information that requires close review. Conflicting data sometimes exists within personnel files on lost date, lost location, and other key details. A machine cannot do this work. It's impossible to set up a machine to say, find me all the lost dates of all the accounted for from the Korean War, because some of these files have multiple lost dates. And given that 10 files could amount to over 1,000 pages of reading, it would take an extremely long time for internal agency researchers to do all of this on their own. Here's where partners can step in. Starting in 2020, I began working this project under the direction of several of the great historians you met recently. Together, we were able to get data from over 500 individual case files. That amounts to tens of thousands of pages reviewed and analyzed. I bookmarked numerous maps for internal researchers and others to return to and identified discrepancies in the files. Working on this project was fulfilling for me on a lot of levels. For one, I was able to substantively advance the cause. Internal researchers stayed in close contact with me so I could be certain that what I was working on did help researchers get a better sense of what happened to accounted for losses. This was important to me on a personal level. It was an honor to support the big effort to provide information on those still missing in the Korean War and Cold War. This is a sentiment shared by all of our researchers, all of our research partners. Working with the DPA gives scholars like us an opportunity to do substantive work to our nation and community. It's a chance for us to do something for someone else. It's not all about us all the time, and that's really rewarding. One of the benefits of our research process is that our projects continue even when our scholars move on to new positions. In my case, when I moved to the research team, Dr. Tashko picked up where I left off and analyzed an additional 500 losses for the Korean War Enhanced Roster of the Dead and 600 more for a related project. Dr. Tashko did an excellent job gathering data and highlighting the problems within the files for researchers. The Korean War Enhanced Roster of the Dead has a ways to go as internal researchers refine and work with the data, but it was great to be able to show what partners can do. As of today, we currently have 10 research projects running. The main one I want to highlight is P127, Korea DMZ Resolve Project. This is a long-standing foundational research project that centers on 600 losses from the DMZ area. In 2021, an internal Korean War researcher identified 600 accounted-for losses for review and analysis. With help from agency researchers and PI staff, I began review of those files, followed up by Dr. Tashko. More importantly, Dr. Zhang is using the files to create maps of where the losses were recovered from. This means that we will be able to see where the losses are recovered from near the 38th parallel. Doing this will complement other efforts by internal agency staff to see patterns of loss and patterns of recovery near the 38th parallel. This could pay dividends as it gives us an idea of where Army graves registration in the 1950s did not go. Such an outcome can inform internal agency approaches to determining where to look for remains in Korea. If we see a large cluster in these visualizations of Army graves registration going to the same area and they're avoiding another area, well, then maybe we should go to that other area and see if there's anyone there. Being able to extract this data from accounted-for losses really helps us answer that question. And this is based on data from the 1950s. This project is in early stages under Dr. Zhang, but in the coming months it will be refined by Dr. Berry and other Korean War researchers, and I believe fundamentally that this is a promising project. To wrap up, the Partnerships and Innovation Directorate, and working with internal agency staff and partners, is doing all it can to advance the cause of bringing home our missing. Thanks to innovative, open-minded, and thoughtful internal researchers, the Partnerships and Innovation Directorate is able to line up highly qualified partners to advance the cause and also expand expertise into the many interrelated fields that drive solving these problems. In doing so, we learn more about each unaccounted-for loss and speed up the recovery and identification of the missing from the Korean War and all past conflicts covered by the DPA mission. I'm optimistic about the future. I believe it's bright for this effort. The Korean War researchers are top-notch. These guys are subject matter experts, and they have outstanding ideas about how to advance the mission. Collectively, partners have decades of skills in historical analysis, geographic information systems, Korean language, archival research, and a variety of other expertise. I look forward to future collaborations with Korea Team. And as mentioned at the beginning of my talk, it was a great honor to be able to address you all. Thank you for taking the time to listen.
All right, folks, we're going to just stand fast. We're waiting for the folks who were in the Cold War breakout. So talk amongst yourselves while we get a little bit organized. If you need to take a break, don't everybody run out of here all at once, but if you need to take a break, you can do it. But we will be starting as soon as they come in from the Cold War breakout. We will start up with a question and answer. All right? Thank you.